Hello, welcome to our YouTube channel. My name is Stephanie and I'm the event coordinator here at Boulder Bookstore, and I'm very excited to be doing my first one of these. So thanks to Julia for getting me to do this, but since it's getting close to Halloween time, I'm a big fan of Halloween, but I'm not a big fan of really scary things. My best friend in high school made me watch like all of the Jason movies. I'm still not sure how she talked me into that, but like I spent almost the whole time like hiding under blankets. So I'm not a big fan of the, you're walking slowly down the hallway waiting for the thing to jump out at you and slasher sort of stuff. That's not really my jam, and I feel like a lot of people think that that's what Halloween is all about. So I thought I would do a little video highlighting what I think are some really great books that to get you into the Halloween spirit that aren't necessarily about blood and gore, and in some cases are just light and fun, but are Halloweeny and spooky and fun all the same. So I've got a beginner level, an intermediate level, and an approaching kind of scary level. And I'll do a kid's book that I think would also be appropriate for adults, and a fiction and a nonfiction. So I'll start with the beginners. And my kid's book, well, can be for anyone, but a big favorite of a lot of people here at the store is Breaking Cat News. And one of the more recent books that came out, I think this past March or April, it was Take It Away, Tommy. So this started as a webcomic series and by Georgia Dunn. And on the webcomic, one of her first specials was a really wonderful Halloween special. And it's a comic strip that's in the papers now, and she's was able to, transform most of the storylines in the original webcomic into the newspaper. But this particular Halloween strip, she wasn't really able to figure out how to make it into a newspaper, so she's made some references to this particular special, but it hasn't actually been in the paper. So if you are a fan of Breaking Cat News in the papers, you should get Taking Away Tommy so you can see this really sweet Halloween special she does with a ghost cat that only Puck can see, and finding what happened to her and reuniting her with her ghost owner. And it's just beautifully done and just really sweet. And if you read it, you can see why it's just that you can't get the fullness of how sweet this story is without in a newspaper format. So highly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of Breaking Cat News. If you don't know what Breaking Cat News is, you should look it up. They're reporter cats that report on all the important news for cats, like why is the woman in the bathroom. It's delightful, it's wonderful, it'll get you in the Halloween spirit, and it's not scary at all, and great for kids and adults. My nonfiction pick for the beginner level is Spook by Mary Roach. Mary Roach is one of my favorite authors, perhaps my favorite nonfiction author, and if you're familiar, I guess probably her most well-known is STIFF, which would also get you into the Halloween spirit, since that's all about the science of what happens to you after you die. But this book is about, the tagline is Science Tackles the Afterlife. So she, it starts with her going to India and visiting researchers who are researching reincarnation. She takes a class in learning how to do psychic readings. She talks about the history of mediumship and all the crazy stuff that was people trying to do science on mediums in the early 20th century. There's stuff about Houdini. There's stuff about just some really bizarre science that people have done. There's the famous 21 gram, the idea that the soul weighs 21 grams. She talks about the history of that experiment, and she does it all with amazing, she's just got a really amazing voice, and she's so funny. And she talks about these, because she comes into these things not knowing anything about a lot of these sciences, so she's interviewing experts in these particular fields, and she writes about it in such a way that it's clear that she doesn't understand, and she's learning, but you never feel like she's talking down to you. It's delightful and fun, and it's got that, the spirit element to it, but you're never scared when you're reading Mary Roach. You're mostly laughing. So, Spook by Mary Roach. And then my fiction selection is Tuesday Mooney Talks to Ghosts. This is coming out in paperback, perhaps by the time this video is airing. I think October 6th is when this comes out in paperback, by RACCULIA. And this is, the setting is Boston, and it's the beginning of October, and there's a banquet, a charity banquet happening, and a very eccentric billionaire is at this banquet and dies in a very dramatic fashion. And the next morning, his obituary in the paper basically says that his money is going to go to whoever can solve this elaborate puzzle that he's set up all throughout Boston. And so the plot basically centers around several different quirky characters trying to solve these riddles and these puzzles and figure out where they're supposed to go to get the next clue. And it's called Tuesday Mooney because the main character, the one we are rooting for throughout, is named Tuesday Mooney, and she has a bit of a, her best friend in high school mysteriously disappeared. Nobody ever found out what happened to her. She's presumed dead, and Tuesday kind of feels like sometimes she's talking to her ghost, and so there's that element to it. It's almost spooky, but it's never really a scary book, but it is all set in October. The culmination of everything is happening on Halloween, and it's got a fun, spooky atmosphere without ever being scary. This is just so much fun. I read this last October, and it was just like the perfect book for the time, and it was just such a delight to read. So, highly recommend. On to the intermediate level. So, with my kid/teen book pick is Pet by Akweke Emezi. This isn't strictly supposed to be like a horror story, but it's set in sort of a utopian future city where they've gotten rid of all the bad people, essentially. They refer to it as the angels getting rid of the monsters, but it's a little more, it's not quite as metaphysical as that. It's more just like they got rid of the bad cops, they got rid of the bad politicians. So in this town, people are respected, people are listened to. But the main character, Jam, she's a trans black girl, and her parents are very loving and wonderful, and they're very happy that she is growing up in a time where she can be who she is. And her mother is a painter, and her mother has painted this picture, this horrific looking creature with these ram's horns and these feathers over its face and the dead human hands of the mother, and Jam is kind of fascinated by it. And then this creature comes out of the painting and tells Jam that it's here to hunt a monster, and the monster is in her best friend's house. And it kind of goes on from there, and it's a lot about the importance of not forgetting things that have happened in the past, the importance of listening to children. But it's you could see it's pretty short, but it's just like every word is full of meaning. There's not a wasted sentence in this book. It's beautifully written, and it's definitely got, it's a teen book, so you don't want to. There's elements of it that might be a bit much for some younger readers, but it's kicking it. The creature that comes out of the painting is named Pet, and Pet is kind of a terrifying creature, but it's not really super scary, so it's kicking it up a notch. Beautifully written book. Pet. And my intermediate nonfiction is The Witches by STACY SCHIFF. She wrote a biography of Cleopatra that was very well received, and this is her book about the Salem witch trials in 1692. And this is history, so a lot of the things that happen, if you know anything about the witch trials, there's not going to be lots of scary surprises, and it's history, so there's not a supernatural element. But STACY SCHIFF does an amazing job of just setting a really creepy tone. Like while you're reading it, you just feel the fear that everyone in Salem was feeling around, just because who knows who's going to get accused next, who's going to be sent to trial, who's going to say what. Everyone is in this state of heightened fear, and you really feel that while you're reading the stories that she's telling about this time frame. And it's a bit of a long read, so you might want to start now if you want to be done by the end of by the time Halloween rolls around, but really worth the read, very interesting, and just really puts you in that creepy mind frame that I like for Halloween anyway. My last selection for the intermediate category, fiction, In the House in the Dark of the Woods by LAIRD Hunt. And I love LAIRD Hunt's writing. He used to live around here. We still kind of consider him a local writer, but he's got a really amazing ability to write from a woman's perspective, and I feel like every book I've read by him is extremely different. And this one, you can see this is another slim, small book, and it's written in a fairy tale sort of style. I mean, you can tell from the title, "In the House in the Dark of the Woods." It's kind of got a sing-song feel to the title. And the main character, you know, it starts with this woman wandering through the woods in New England, and it seems like it's a beautiful day, she's got her berry basket, she's walking along, and then she'll kind of drop these little hints of like, kind of like, wait a minute, what did she say? Like, and then he won't hurt me sort of things, and like, just kind of dropping in like, and okay, well I promised them and I can't let the promise go this time, and it's sort of building up from there, and then strange things start to happen. She starts to encounter strange things and strange people, then it just kind of enters this whole getting more Grimm's fairy tale than a Disney fairy tale sort of feeling to it. It gets pretty creepy, but it's never gory, and I don't think it's something that's going to give you nightmares necessarily. I guess it depends on what kind of nightmares you have, but I would still put it at an intermediate level of, and Laird Hunt is just a beautiful writer, and it's very lyrically written, so it's very literary, but it moves you right along, and it's just hard to put down because you're like just trying to figure out the whole time, like, what's going on, where is she, what's really happening here. All right, so the last category. So these are books that are most people would consider fairly scary, but I think most people, unless you're super sensitive, can probably handle this without feeling like you're gonna get too many nightmares, but I love these books. All right. So my kids selection, Coraline by Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman is, of course, well known for many things like American Gods and Sandman, but this is the first Neil Gaiman book that I ever read, and I still feel like it's one of his best. Again, very short, it doesn't take very long to read. Dave McKean does these great illustrations throughout, and the setting is a young girl named Coraline who's just moved into a new apartment with her family, and it's in a big old house that's been divided up into other little apartments. And so she's getting to know the other people who live there, and then she discovers that in this house, in her apartment, there's a tiny little door. And one night she goes through it, and as she comes out the other side, it looks like she's just back in her regular apartment, but her mother is there, and her mother has buttons for eyes. And I really don't feel like I want to say too much more than that, other than it's just there's a building sense of creep and horror. And I've definitely talked to people who've read this book and have been like, oh, buttons for eyes, like just the idea of things that are very familiar being very slightly wrong. My nonfiction, I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. This was recently turned into an HBO documentary series. If you know anything about this, then you might know that Michelle McNamara, she died before the book was finished, and her husband, Patton Oswalt, who's one of my favorite comedians, he worked very hard to get this book finished and got it published. And then maybe 2 months after the book got published, they actually caught the serial killer that is the subject of this book, the Golden State Killer, which Michelle McNamara actually gave him that name. So this is her sort of her life's work, researching this serial killer, serial rapist, and but it's really also more than about the killer, it's about all of the victims. She's got interviews with the people that she could interview, and she really just gives a great sense of humanity and loss to these stories, because the focus isn't on like the killings necessarily as it is on the effects that it's had on the people left behind, but it is about an actual real life serial killer. So in that aspect, it's, you know, it can be a bit much for some people, but this was a really well written and fascinating story, and there are parts of it that it's not completely, you can feel that it's not super finished just because she died before she had the opportunity, but it's still just just seeing her process and hearing how these amateur sleuths are out there on the internet, you know, combing through through, you know, like Google Maps, trying to look at sites and reading like police reports and just getting really involved in wanting to solve these crimes. And it's really fascinating and kind of creepy, especially when you're reading about things that have actually happened. So, but very well done. And then my last book, which we are currently sold out of, but hopefully I know we've got tons on order, but The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. Stephen Graham Jones is a local guy, nationally known, but we are super happy that he lives here because he is an amazing horror writer. 4 Blackfeet Indian men who, you find out fairly early on, 10 years ago, went on a hunting trip. They went to an area they were not supposed to hunt in, and they killed a lot of elk. And one of those elk was pregnant, and 10 years later, it turns out some people haven't really forgotten about this, and these guys have mostly spread out. They're, 2 of them have just completely left the reservation, and the book opens with one of them possibly being killed by some ghost elk. You spend the first part of the book following one of these guys, and you're not quite sure, like, is he going crazy? Is he seeing things? Is there some spirit coming for him? And then the second half, don't want to give too much away, but there's you focus on the other 2 guys who are left, and it's very creepy, but it's not, you don't spend the whole time like hiding behind your hands waiting, like with things coming at you all the time and blood and gore everywhere, and there's definitely some blood and gore, but a lot of it is spent in character building and in learning about these guys and how they're in the situations that they're in. It's just a really amazing book, and Stephen Graham Jones is an amazing author, and the characters that he's created for these, they're very full, real characters. I mean, he himself is Blackfeet, so it makes sense that he's, able to get into the heads of these guys. And again, I'm not typically a horror reader, but Stephen Graham Jones he doesn't go too far, for me anyway, into every page covered in blood and guts sort of thing, but he does the creep really well for me. So those are my books. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this content, if you like the other things that we're doing on our channel, we would really appreciate it if you would subscribe, particularly because as the holidays come closer, we're going to be doing lots of recommendations in different categories to try and help you with your holiday shopping. So subscribe, and thanks for watching.